Chapter 6 of Mary Barton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dawn Murphy in El Segundo, California. Mary Barton by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskill. Chapter 6. Poverty and Death. How little can the rich man know of what the poor man feels, when want, like some dark demon foe, nearer and nearer steals. He never tramped the weary round, a stroke of work to gain, and sickened at the dreaded sound, telling him 'twas in vain. Footsore, heartsore, he never came back through the winter's wind, to a dank cellar, there no flame, no light, no food to find. He never saw his darlings lie shivering, the grass their bed. He never heard that maddening cry, "Daddy, a bit of bread!" Manchester Song. John Barton was not far wrong in his idea that the Messrs. Carson would not be overmuch grieved for the consequences of the fire in their mill. They were well insured. The machinery lacked the improvements of late years, and worked but poorly in comparison with that which might now be procured. Above all, trade was very slack. Cottons could find no market, and goods lay packed and piled in many a warehouse. The mills were merely worked to keep the machinery, human and metal, in some kind of order and readiness for better times. So this was an excellent opportunity, Messrs. Carson thought, for refitting their factory with first-rate improvements, for which the insurance money would amply pay. They were in no hurry about the business, however. The weekly drain of wages given for labour, useless in the present state of the market, was stopped. The partners had more leisure than they had known for years, and promised wives and daughters all manner of pleasant excursions, as soon as the weather should become more genial. It was a pleasant thing to be able to lounge over breakfast with a review or newspaper in hand, to have time for becoming acquainted with agreeable and accomplished daughters, on whose education no money had been spared, but whose fathers, shut up during a long day with calicoes and accounts, had so seldom had leisure to enjoy their daughters' talents. There were happy family evenings, now that the men of business had time for domestic enjoyments. There is another side of the picture. There were homes over which Carson's fire threw a deep, terrible gloom, the homes of who would fain work, and no men gave unto them, the homes of those to whom leisure was a curse. There the family music was hungry wails, when week after week passed by, and there was no work to be had, and consequently no wages to pay for the bread the children cried aloud for in their young impatience of suffering. There was no breakfast to lounge over. Their lounge was taken in bed, to try and keep warmth in them that bitter March weather, and by being quiet to deaden the gnawing wolf within. Many a penny that would have gone little way enough in oatmeal or potatoes bought opium to still the hungry little ones, and make them forget their uneasiness and heavy troubled sleep. It was mother's mercy. The evil and the good of her nature came out strongly then. There were desperate fathers, there were bitter-tongued mothers. O God, what wonder! There were reckless children. The very closest bonds of nature were snapped in that time of trial and distress. There was faith, such as the rich can never imagine on earth. There was love, strong as death, and self-denial among rude, coarse men, akin to that of Sir Philip Sidney's most glorious deed. The vices of the poor sometimes astound us here, but when the secrets of all hearts shall be made known, their virtues will astound us in far greater degree. Of this I am certain. As the cold, bleak spring came on, spring in name alone, and consequently as trade continued dead, other mills shortened hours, turned off hands, and finally stopped work altogether. Barton worked short hours. Wilson, of course, being a hand in Carson's factory, had no work at all. But his son, working at an engineer's, and a steady man, obtained wages enough to maintain all the family in a careful way. Still it preyed on Wilson's mind to be so long indebted to his son. He was out of spirits and depressed. Barton was morose and soured towards mankind as a body, and the rich in particular. One evening, when the clear light at 6 o'clock contrasted strangely with the Christmas cold, and when the bitter wind piped down every entry and through every cranny, Barton sat brooding over his stinted fire and listening for Mary's step, in unacknowledged trust that her presence would cheer him. The door was opened, and Wilson came breathless in. "You've not got a bit of money by you, Barton?" asked he. "Not I. Who has now? I'd like to know. What'n you want it for?" "I do not want it for myself, though we've none to spare. But don't you know Ben Davenport as worked at Carson's? He's down with a fever, and ne'er a stick of fire nor a cold potato in the house." "I hadn't got no money, I tell ye," said Barton. Wilson looked disappointed. Barton tried not to be interested, but he could not help it in spite of his gruffness. He rose and went to the cupboard, his wife's pride long ago. There lay the remains of his dinner, hastily put by ready for supper. Bread, and a slice of cold fat boiled bacon. He wrapped them in his handkerchief, put them in the crown of his hat, and said, "Come, let us be going." "Going? Art thou going to work this time o' day?" "No, stupid, to be sure not. Going to see the chap thou spoke on." So they put on their hats and set out. On the way, Wilson said Davenport was a good fellow, though too much of the Methody; that his children were too young to work, but not too young to be cold and hungry; that they had sunk lower and lower, and pawned thing after thing, and that they now lived in a cellar in Berry Street, off Store Street. Barton growled inarticulate words of no benevolent import to a large class of mankind. So they went along till they arrived in Berry Street. It was unpaved, and down the middle a gutter forced its way, every now and then forming pools in the holes with which the street abounded. Never was the old Edinburgh cry of "Garde lo" more necessary than in this street. As they passed, women from their doors tossed household slops of every description into the gutter. They ran into the next pool, which overflowed and stagnated. Heaps of ashes were the stepping-stones on which the passer-by, who cared in the least for cleanliness, took care not to put his foot. Our friends were not dainty, but even they picked their way, till they got to some steps leading down to a small area, where a person standing would have his head about 1 foot below the level of the street, and might at the same time, without the least motion of his body, touch the window of the cellar and the damp muddy wall right opposite. You went down 1 step even from the foul area into the cellar in which a family of human beings lived. It was very dark inside. The window-panes, many of them, were broken and stuffed with rags, which was reason enough for the dusky light that pervaded the place even at midday. After the account I have given of the state of the street, no one can be surprised that on going into the cellar inhabited by Davenport, the smell was so fetid as almost to knock the 2 men down. Quickly recovering themselves, as those inured to such things do, they began to penetrate the thick darkness of the place, and to see 3 or 4 little children rolling on the damp, nay, wet brick floor, through which the stagnant, filthy moisture of the street oozed up. The fireplace was empty and black. The wife sat on her husband's lair, and cried in the dark loneliness, "See, missus, I'm back again. Hold your noise, children, and don't mither your mammy for bread. Here's a chap as got some for you." In that dim light, which was darkness to strangers, they clustered around Barton, and tore from him